I feel that it's more important the choices of sound that you use more than the processing of it. I would place myself between an old school approach and a more futuristic one. I'm still very much influenced by the old school way of chopping samples and finding sounds through old records, especially when I want to make something a little bit more within the 90s techno spectrum. But on the other side, I really enjoy a lot of stuff that is coming out, especially involving artificial intelligence as well. For example, for finding vocals, you have a lot of great algorithms nowadays to isolate vocals from old tracks in a way that wasn't possible before, which is opening kind of a new era of sampling as well, because you can really isolate now even guitars completely, instruments. So I really also look into that while still maintaining a more old school approach to it when it comes to writing music afterwards. You know, I come from a hip-hop background and been listening to hip-hop and been inspired by hip-hop throughout my whole journey into music. And it's a lot about chopping already existing drum breaks, for example, or just sounds in general. And by pitching them down or up, you really get different textures that eventually will add a different character to the original sound. So that's already kind of a process to it without just basically doing nothing but pitching down or up. So that is mainly my go-to when it comes to creating drums. And also samples and sampling in general is the fundamentals of my production, I would say. I'm really inspired by using already existing sounds and kind of rescuing them and giving them a new light by not necessarily taking sounds from already existing tracks, but just using sounds as a source to create something new and just write sequences with it. Same with the drums as well. The sampler in Ableton is fantastic. There's so many functions that you can use and trigger within the basic sampler. But what was really a game changer for me was the Granulator 2, which is a Max for Live plugin. It's like a sampler that has a granular synthesis engine within. And granular synthesis, long story short, is like a way of synthesize sounds that involves micro-sampling a sound at certain points called grains. And by triggering these different grains, you have the same sounds playing at different pitches and intervals. And for instance, let's say I want to do a bass line, I can trigger like a bass sound with granular synthesis and create like different ranges of textures within the same octave. And that's very inspiring for me. Everything I do is completely in Ableton and mostly with the Ableton plugin, the stock ones. I own very few external third-party plugins. I just mix everything within the DAW, and then what is really important is checking through different systems how the track sounds. So I will do it in the headphones, then on the speakers, eventually in the car. That's what really makes a mix stands out when it works throughout different systems. But everything is done within the DAW, simple as that. The very few third-party plugins that I'm using is Portal by Output. It's an effect, and it really brings so much textures and grains to sounds. It's really an insane plugin for synths and for drums. What I like to use for drums is the Omega Transformer. It's a very nice plugin to add character into the mix. And the Valhalla reverbs, those are really interesting and a bit of a classic reverb. So many people are using them, and I can highly recommend because they give a nice, smooth room to drums. I love the saturators in Ableton, and the amplifier for me are like unmatched. And I also love the compression. Like, as long as you know what to tweak, I think it doesn't really matter what you use. And I'm very confident with those. I've been using them for years. So I really know what to put where in order to achieve a certain like character when it comes to, you know, sounds and processing, the sounds, and also like mastering and mixing down tracks. I use everything in Ableton stock. I don't like being creative while something is not sounding right. So for instance, as soon as I'm gonna add a hi-hat, I'll make sure the level is making sense with the rest so that then I can add a synth line and so on. And once the loop is sounding nice, I actually master the loop. So I apply effects on the master chain and then I do the arrangement later. So I really want to have something that is sounding good and sounding cohesive, because I feel like when you're creating a track and you're putting focus on the creativity aspect of it, you kind of decide already very distinct choices in the mixing side of it. So those choices, eventually they will stick until the end of the finished track for me. Because I tried to change the mix down eventually, like making V2 or V3, but those, they very rarely ended up being better versions than the original. I have a lot of chains that I made, like chains of effect, that are helping me with having something that makes sense, especially when it comes to the relationship between kick and bass. And I try to pay attention to the frequencies when it comes to blending a kick and a bass. So usually there's a drum bus, equalizer, saturation, and eventually at the end of a chain, a compressor. Those are my go-to, and all of these stock Ableton. Those are my go-to when it comes to having a certain sound for a kick drum, and mostly just side chaining the sub bass to the kick. I usually start with a kick drum because I feel like the kick drum is really the base and the pillar of what is going to be built on top. And most of the time I realize that starting with drums makes me also affect the way the other sound will follow, especially if I have lighter kick drum or a lighter bass. The tracks eventually will end up also a little bit in this direction. So this kind of helps me to steer the wheel a bit when it comes to what I want to do. But at the same time, I may craft a kick drum that has nothing to do with the rest of the sounds that I'm choosing. And eventually I will just come back and change it. But usually I start with making a solid kick and bass. I think the fact that no one taught me how to make music and then I'm self-taught made me really have a wider view when it comes to rules and try not to stick with certain stigmas that the community or like someone that teaches music is trying to implement in your creativity. And I have a lot of happy accidents, like actually almost every day, because I don't have many rules. I decide my own rules, and this gives me a lot of freedom, such as, I don't know, creating like a synth line with a drum loop, or putting vocals, like pitching down vocals to create some ambience or whatever that may be. So yeah, but it's mostly coming back to using weird samples to create sounds. Yeah. I own a Scarlett audio interface. I owned it for, I think, almost 10 years. I think it's just a very affordable, safe bet when it comes to having something that processes audio in a decent way and is not overly expensive. And that's the thing about, I think, making music. You don't really need a huge budget to be able to make great music. For me, it doesn't really matter using the Scarlett or using another audio interface. As a matter of fact, I'm mostly making music through my headphones, even when I'm here. And I just like having something that is comfortable for me, such as the headphones, or I also know how a track should sound on the HS8, for example. It really comes to what works for you, and what makes the difference is having something that you're comfortable with, and it can be something that costs, I don't know, 10,000 euro or just a couple €100 like a Scarlett. But as long as you're happy and as long as you know how to make tracks and being inspired, that's all you need, I think.